Capitol tonight. President Obama delivered a dual message in his State of the Union this week, citing a need for government to cut back on spending while also continuing to make smart investments that will help the economy grow. One area the president wants to invest is infrastructure, particularly high-speed rail. Let's take a listen to that.
Within 25 years, our goal is to give 80% of Americans access to high-speed rail. This could allow you to go places in half the time it takes to travel by car. For some trips, it will be faster than flying, without the pat-down. As we speak, routes in California and the Midwest are already underway.
Okay, this is something of a gamble by the Obama administration. High-speed rail has become a political hot potato, with the White House yanking promised funds from states where Republican governors wanted to divert the money to other projects. Now, here in New York, high-speed rail has been a goal for years, but so far nothing has gotten off the ground. My next guest, however, has not given up hope. He is Queens Senator Malcolm Smith, and he attended a congressional hearing on high-speed rail today in New York City. Senator, good to see you.
Good to be here with you, Liz, always.
So this was a field hearing, actually, by a House Committee on Transportation. You were there. Mayor Bloomberg testified. He spoke very strongly in favor of high-speed rail. You had former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell was there, too. Just give us a little bit of a synopsis about what was said.
Okay, well, first, Liz, let me tell you, even prior to the hearing, myself, the Chairman Mica, and the subcommittee chair, Congressman Schuster, had a meeting at Warburg Pincus to talk with a number of finance people to talk about how to finance high-speed rail. It was a very good meeting, offered a lot of information to us. The hearing itself obviously talked about high-speed rail in the Northeast Corridor. That Congressman Mica, who is the chairman of the Transportation Committee in the House, from Florida, I might ask, a Republican, and his committeemen, also women, also understand the importance of high-speed rail in the Northeast Corridor. There were 14 congressional people from around the country who was here in New York for that hearing, and it was also the first hearing that he put together since becoming the chair for this new Congress.
It's interesting that you bring up Florida, because actually the Obama administration has put a premium on high-speed rail. And they offered actually, I think it was $8 billion in 2009 for states to apply for, okay? New York wanted $4 billion and got $151 million, not a lot. And then subsequently about 1.2 or 4 billion, 2 billion, sorry, of the money that Wisconsin and Ohio were going to be using for high-speed rail, and then the Republican governors decided that they didn't want that money anymore. Rather, they didn't want those projects anymore. The Obama administration said, if you don't use that money, we're going to give it to somebody else. And they gave the lion's share to California and Florida, because those two states are actually further along than we are. I mean, we are really not very far off the ground at all.
Well, you know, actually, we are much further than most people think. We did get $7 million of that money that was reappropriated. We now have a high-speed rail planning board. You know, Liz, that myself offered the bill, and the governor signed it. Yep. And we have seated most of those members now. The board will be meeting. They only have a year to put together a financial plan as well as a operational plan. But again, this is part of the Northeast Corridor Commission completely. There is $11 million for an EIS study. That was part of the subject today. A lot of pressure was put on FRA. Karen Ray was there for them to start that EIS study that they received about $11 million. It includes all of the Northeast Corridor states from Maine on down to Washington. And so it was a good meeting today. After the hearing, we actually had a focus group. I participated in that with a number of people from the congressional hearing, as well as other financial people. As a matter of fact, even Jay Walder was a part of it. And a lot of discussion was around financing and how to prioritize the Northeast Corridor. And what came across today, more importantly, is that everybody said we have to focus in on one area, make that happen, and then from there move on to do other areas. Yes, California and Florida are further along, but from a transportation mitigation standpoint, in terms of air traffic, the Northeast Corridor is a key focal point for
Right.
that.
Well, of course, because as many people who fly know, if you fly in and out of New York City, you're almost indefinitely, you're almost certain to be delayed. And of course, if you could get people from one place to the other via high-speed rail, particularly in New York, it would open up all sorts of jobs and economic development. It would be a boon. Here's the problem, though. In 1993, then Governor Mario Cuomo announced a plan to put bullet trains from New York City to Albany. 1993. We've talked about this from Mario Cuomo, George Pataki, Eliot Spitzer, David Patterson. You're having a field hearing now, and Barack Obama has clearly made this a priority. But what's going to change it? What is going to make this a reality now when Mario Cuomo couldn't get it off the ground?
Well, here's what history has taught us. On an initiative this large, and I'm talking about whether it was the Erie Canal, whether it was the interstate, whether it was railway that was originally done, whether it was Dwight Eisenhower, whether it was Jefferson, whether it was Lincoln, you always had a presidential cheerleader behind a major infrastructure initiative. President Obama has done so also. He's put money, public money, where his suggestion is. And clearly his statement that you played earlier at the State of the Union, I was down there for that, was a statement that was everybody heard around the world. My BlackBerry was ringing off the hook once he made that statement because of such an aggressive stand on high-speed rail. And again, we also have a governor in the state of New York who is very close to that president, very close to Secretary LaHood, who actually came to New York when we had a high-speed rail hearing back in November, and everybody is committed to this. What we now have to do is begin to move aggressively on the state level and also on that whole Northeast Corridor. I'm very optimistic. As optimistic as I was about the Democrats taking the majority in 2008, I am equally optimistic about high-speed rail coming to New York.
Okay, I don't want to burst your bubble on that particular analogy, but the Democrats lost the majority not so long ago in 2010. So I'm just saying.
We won it in 2008, but I'm going to tell you about my prophetic business, my prophetic and commitment and how things happen.
Okay, so talk to me for a second. That environmental impact study, we've been talking about that again for a number of years. That's what the EIS is that you were referring to.
Yes.
Until that gets done, we really can't know, even if high-speed rail is possible. I mean, there are a number of problems. There are bottleneck problems. There are problems with CSX versus a passenger rail. We're trying to get a passenger rail, and then there's freight. There's still a fair amount of freight in this state that moves along the railways, and that's part of the problem here.
Right, but actually it's not part of the problem, and we have examples all over the country and around the world. And that is, there will be a dedicated line for a true high-speed rail. We're not talking about going from 105 miles an hour to 110 or cutting time down by 10 minutes. We're talking true high-speed rail, 200, 220 miles an hour. That was a clear focus today of the hearing that Governor Rendell talked about, that Mayor Bloomberg spoke about as well. And Freight Line will be a dedicated, separate line. It will not be a matter of us trying to figure out who runs on what line at what time of day. It'll be good for freight on their own. So we will have a separate, dedicated line that will allow the speed of the train necessary. And yes, there's still a lot of work to be done, but the EIS study has at least a year or so to be completed. Once that is completed on the Northeast Corridor, actually, it'll probably be done around the same time that the Planning Board in New York, of which Governor Cuomo will name a chair for, will actually finish their study, which will determine how do we finance high-speed rail and how do we operate it, whether it's an authority or an agency or a sub-agency. Obviously, we got to be mindful of keeping government controlled and restricted in terms of overspending. But this is clear. We've heard a lot of testimony today about the benefits of it, the revenue that is generated in terms of paying it off from the fare box to ancillary real estate around the stations. It is a transformational initiative that is going to take New York into the 21st century in terms of transportation.
Okay, you know, you reference two issues here that have been problems in the past. One is that there's never been any one single entity that has been designated to oversee this project. You've got so many different entities that touch this project. You have, you know, for example, the MTA probably has a piece of it, ESDC probably has a piece of it, you've got DOT having a piece of it, all of these different entities, and of course DEC, if I'm starting to sound like alphabet soup. But one of the problems was that there was never one voice who was going to be overseeing all of this. Are you speaking about, at this point, to have one person or one body just dedicated to high-speed rail?
Well, I think that's necessary, and I recently had a meeting with Senator Gillibrand, and she also advanced the same concept. She said she was going to talk to Governor Cuomo about it. We both agree, and most of my colleagues that I've spoken to agree that there's going to have to be one person dedicated to advancing high-speed rail. It is so many pieces that are involved, as you so rightfully stated, Liz, that you're going to require one person that's going to be focused on it, that's going to move it through those particular agencies as well as Washington. But I believe, again, to have a presidential cheerleader as President Obama, and given what we saw today, I mean, this was major. And think about it. You had a chairman of a House committee that's a Republican from Florida who already has high-speed rail moving in his state, here having his first hearing of the year in New York City to talk about how important high-speed rail is in the Northeast Corridor, and then having two very noteworthy people such as Governor Rendell and also Mayor Bloomberg talking about that. And then prior to that, in 8 o'clock in the morning in New York City, where we had a big snowstorm, we had 25 people in a room, including myself and the congressman and Congressman Schuster, Kathy Weil from the partnership, put it together, talking about high-speed rail and how to finance it. That's a major happening for this initiative.
So if there was to be one person who was the point person, would you like to be that individual? Because, you know, you can't be a senator forever.
No, I listen. I'm a soldier, and I do whatever the Lord has for me. And right now, I enjoy being a state senator. I'm going to continue to do that and try to advance high-speed rail, as well as trying to advance education and jobs in the state of New York. We've got a $10 billion deficit that we're going to have to talk about next week with the governor and figure out how do we make sure we cut spending, make sure taxes are not increased, but at the same time do not hurt those individuals who need the help from government.
Well, and also continue to invest in infrastructure so you can grow jobs and boost the economy, which is exactly what President Obama said also during the State of the Union. I want to thank you very much, Senator Smith. It's good to see you, and be careful out there in the snow festival that is New York City.
Thank you very much, Liz. Always good to be talking to you.
Very fun. Thanks, Malcolm.